Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for more lost gold and treasure stories. Please leave a like, comment, share, and hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell for new videos. Relax and enjoy. Welcome to the Southwest Desert, where we unearth the buried stories of the American Southwest. Today, we're delving into the haunting tale of the Cerro Colorado silver mine. Nestled in the sun-baked hills of southern Arizona, this mine has a history as rich and complex as the ore it once produced. So settle in, dear listeners, as we journey back to a time of frontier dreams and deadly consequences. Our story begins in the bustling pueblo of Tucson, nearly a century ago. Picture the scene: dusty streets, adobe buildings, and a clash of cultures as the American frontier pushes westward. It's here that we meet our first character, Major Sam Heinzelman of the U.S. Army. Heinzelman, a man with mineralogical training from Germany, finds himself in Solomon Warner's general store. His eye is caught by a piece of lustrous gray ore on the counter. Recognizing it as stromayerite, a high-grade silver ore, Heinzelman's interest is immediately piqued. After some clever maneuvering and a fair bit of smooth talking, Heinzelman tracks down the source of the ore, a Sonoran teamster named Whitticon. But Whitticon is wary of the American officer, and it takes considerable negotiation and the promise of $500 in gold to convince him to reveal the location of the silver deposit. The unlikely pair set out at dawn, pushing their mules south along the Santa Cruz Valley. They pass the old mission of San Xavier, a silent witness to the changing times, before reaching the Cerrita Mountains. But here, dear listeners, is where our tale takes its first dramatic turn. Whitticon, perhaps wisely, begins to have second thoughts. He's heard stories of the Yankees and their sharp dealings. How can he be sure he'll actually receive the promised gold? Despite Heinzelman's threats and promises, the Sonoran turns back, leaving the frustrated major empty-handed. But Heinzelman is not a man easily deterred. The next day, he tracks down Whitticon once more. This time, he makes a public commitment in Warner's store to pay the gold upon proof of the lode's existence. With witnesses to the deal, Whitticon agrees to a second attempt. As night falls on their second journey, Whitticon points out their destination, Cerro Colorado, the Red Mountain, its towers gleaming ruby silver in the sunset. Wary of Apache attacks, they push on through the velvet darkness of the desert night, finally making camp in the mesquite groves of Upper Sapori Creek. With the first light of dawn, Whitticon leads Heinzelman to a small red mountain called El Cerro Chiquito. There, hidden among scrub mesquite, they find a crude shaft. As Whitticon clears away the debris, tension mounts. Finally, he unearths what they've been seeking, a chunk of pétanque, almost pure silver. But here, dear listeners, is where our tale takes a dark turn. For Major Heinzelman, it seems, has no intention of honoring his agreement. Upon returning to Tucson, instead of the promised $500 in gold, he presents Whitticon with a single piece of two-back paper money, worth a mere 50 cents. With this act of betrayal, Heinzelman sets in motion a chain of events that would haunt the mine for decades to come. Wasting no time, Heinzelman began working the claim, sinking a 50-foot shaft into the rich ore. But his triumph was short-lived. Just a few months later, in 1856, Thomas and Ignacio Ortiz, the rightful owners of the rancho where the mine was located, discovered the intrusion and promptly ran Heinzelman off their property. Soon after, the Sonora Mining and Exploring Company, headquartered in Tubac, Arizona, purchased both the Cerro Colorado property and the rancho. Under the management of Charles D. Poston, with his brother John overseeing the mine itself, the Cerro Colorado began to flourish. The ore was incredibly rich, yielding an astounding $7,000 per ton of silver. But the good times wouldn't last. As our story takes another tragic turn, we're reminded of the dangers that miners faced in those days. Sometime after 1860, disaster struck. Deep in the candlelit depths of the mine, 15 Mexican Indian miners were working, filling their rawhide bags with shining silver ore. Without warning, the ceiling caved in, burying all 15 men alive. The cave-in was so severe that recovery of the bodies was impossible. To this day, those unfortunate souls remain entombed 70 feet below the Earth's surface. This tragedy marked a turning point for the mine. Many of the surviving miners, believing the mine to be haunted by the ghosts of their fallen comrades, fled back to their homes in Sonora. But the mine's troubles were far from over. As if the cave-in wasn't enough, external forces soon conspired against the mine. The outbreak of the Civil War led to the withdrawal of troops from Arizona Territory. Cochise, the feared Apache chief, saw his opportunity and began a campaign to drive all whites from southern Arizona. With Apache arrows flying and the threat of attack ever present, Charles Poston made the difficult decision to leave Arizona. He left his brother John in charge of the mine and departed with a mining engineer named Raphael Pumpelly. But John Poston's tenure would be marked by violence and betrayal. Days before his brother's departure, John had caught the mine's Sonoran foreman Juanito, attempting to flee south with a hefty load of stolen silver bullion. Frustrated by the constant thefts and desertions, John Poston made a fateful and brutal decision. In a shocking act of cold-blooded murder, Poston shot Juanito out of his saddle. This killing was the final straw. Work at the mine ground to a halt as the remaining miners, fearing for their lives, stole whatever they could carry and slipped away in the night. But they didn't leave empty-handed. They took with them a tantalizing story that would become the stuff of legend. According to the fleeing miners, Juanito had managed to bury $70,000 worth of stolen silver bullion somewhere on the slope between the Cerro Colorado shaft and the Cerro Chiquito to the north. News of the hidden treasure spread like wildfire. A band of Sonoran outlaws, bolstered by former mine employees seeking revenge, raced north to claim the prize. They arrived at the mine shortly after Charles Poston and Pumpelly had fled. In a brutal act of vengeance, they killed John Poston and 2 German workers. With no one left to stop them, the outlaws tore the mine and its surroundings apart in their frenzied search for Juanito's buried treasure. But their efforts were in vain. The silver remained hidden, its location dying with Juanito. To this day, the legend persists. Many believe that $70,000 in silver bullion still lies buried somewhere between the Cerro Colorado and the Cerro Chiquito, waiting for a lucky soul to unearth it. As we near the end of our tale, let's fast forward to the turn of the 20th century. Enter Charles E. Udall, a man who would become intimately connected with the mine's later history. Udall, intrigued by the mine's potential, formed a company in 1900. Among his investors was none other than the famous Diamond Jim Brady. Under Udall's leadership, Mexican Indian miners once again descended into the mine's depths, braving its dark reputation in search of riches. Udall built new structures on the foundations of the old, including a commissary, an office, and an $8,000 residence. But even as he sought to breathe new life into the mine, the shadows of its past lingered. Behind Udall's new buildings lay the old Campo Santo, a small cemetery where 18 souls who had died at the mine since Heinzelman's time found their final rest. Among them, in a touch of dark whimsy, lay Udall's beloved parrot, buried in an $800 shroud of Chinese brocade. And so we come to the end of our story, but not to the end of the Cerro Colorado's mysteries. To this day, treasure hunters still come to the old mine, seeking permission to dig for Juanito's lost silver. Udall, in his later years, would simply tell them, "Go ahead on a 50-50 basis. Who knows? But perhaps the last word should go to an old Mexican miner encountered near the ruins of the Cerro Colorado. His words serve as a fitting epitaph for this troubled place. She may still have a treasure and be a rich one for the Patonk, but what sane man would go down there and get mixed up with the ghosts that haunt the mine? Since the earliest days, the mine has had bad luck, many say a curse. As the sun sets over the Cerro Colorado, casting long shadows across its weathered ruins, one can't help but wonder, is there truly a curse on this old silver mine? Or is it simply a victim of human greed, prejudice, and the harsh realities of frontier life? Whatever the truth may be, the story of the Cerro Colorado serves as a stark reminder of the complex and often tragic history that lies beneath the sun-baked earth of the American Southwest. It's a tale of dreams and betrayals, of riches and ruin, of life and death, a microcosm of the Wild West itself. This has been the Southwest Desert. Until next time, may your own frontiers be filled with discovery, and may your ghosts rest easy. Happy trails. Welcome to the Southwest Desert, the channel that delves into the mysteries of lost history, lost treasures, and hidden riches. Today, we're venturing into the rugged terrain of Arizona to uncover the legend of the lost Squaw Hollow gold mine. Grab your prospecting gear and join us as we sift through the sands of time to reveal a tale of pioneer bravery, Apache warfare, and a gold strike so rich it has become the stuff of legend. Our story begins in 1864, a time when the American Southwest was still wild and untamed. The air was thick with tension as settlers pushed westward, encroaching on Apache lands. It was in this volatile environment that a group of pioneer Indian fighters, led by the renowned Colonel Woolsey, found themselves in a region about 40 miles north of present-day Phoenix, Arizona. Among these men was Judge J.T. Alsap, a figure whose testimony lends credibility to our tale. The judge, along with his compatriots, had just engaged in a skirmish with a small band of Apache warriors. As the dust settled from their encounter, they made camp in an area known as Squaw Hollow, located in the Camp Creek country, roughly 10 miles south of Bronco Canyon. Picture, if you will, these hardy men, their nerves still jangling from the recent fight, setting up camp in the shadow of the rugged hills. But for some of these pioneers, the thrill of battle was quickly replaced by the lure of gold. While most of the group rested, a few intrepid souls decided to try their luck prospecting in the nearby hills. Now, dear listeners, imagine the scene when these amateur prospectors returned to camp just a few hours later. Their eyes were wide with excitement, and in their hands they carried a prize that would set any gold seeker's heart racing, a hat brimming with gold ore. But this wasn't just any gold ore. According to Judge Alsap, it was the richest he had ever laid eyes on. In an instant, the mood in the camp must have shifted. Gone were the thoughts of Apache attacks and the hardships of frontier life. Instead, visions of wealth and the promise of a better future surely danced in their minds. But as we'll soon learn, fate had other plans for our pioneering prospectors. Just as the group was reveling in their newfound fortune, the harsh reality of their situation came crashing back. The Apache warriors they had encountered earlier returned, and this time, they weren't alone. They had brought reinforcements, and suddenly, Colonel Woolsey and his men found themselves vastly outnumbered. In the face of this overwhelming force, the pioneers had no choice but to beat a hasty retreat. In their rush to escape, they left behind no markers, no clues to guide them back to their incredible discovery. The golden treasure they had held in their hands just moments before was now lost to the wilderness. As the years passed, the men who had been present at that fateful discovery became separated. The brutal Apache wars continued to rage across the territory, making any return to Squaw Hollow a perilous proposition. But the memory of that rich gold ore lingered in their minds, a tantalizing secret they all hoped to one day reclaim. You see, each of these men had harbored the dream of returning to stake their legal claim on the gold ledge. This shared ambition had kept them from spreading word of their discovery. Little did they know that their silence would turn their secret into one of the Southwest's most enduring lost treasure tales. Fast forward many years. The Apache Wars had finally come to an end, and the Southwest was entering a new era of relative peace. It was during this time that Judge Alsap, older but still driven by the memory of that gold-filled hat, decided to return to Squaw Hollow. The judge set up his base of operations at Camp Creek, not far from the site of their original discovery. Day after day, he scoured the area, his eyes constantly scanning the ground for any sign of that elusive gold ledge. But as he searched, he made a surprising discovery, or rather, a lack of discovery. There were no mines in the area, no prospect holes, nothing to indicate that any of his former companions had returned to claim their prize. The land remained as wild and untouched as it had been on that fateful day in 1864. This realization must have filled the judge with a mix of hope and frustration. The gold was still out there, waiting to be found, but its exact location remained a mystery. Our tale takes an intriguing turn. Years after Judge Alsap's fruitless search, a new character enters our story, an old Mexican sheep herder. This unnamed herder was driving his flocks down from the hills into the Salt River Valley when he decided to make camp one night in Squaw Hollow. To his surprise, he wasn't alone in this remote spot. He encountered a man living in a cabin, a solitary prospector who was working what he claimed to be a rich gold mine in the vicinity. Picture this scene: the lonely cabin in the wilderness, the bleating of sheep mingling with the sound of ore being crushed, and two men sharing stories around a campfire. The prospector revealed to the sheep herder that he was extracting gold from his secret mine, crushing the ore in a large iron mortar and panning it in the creek. But what's truly fascinating is the purpose behind his lonely endeavor. He told the sheep herder that he was sending the gold east to put his son through college. But like many elements of our story, this prospector and his mine seemed to vanish into thin air. When the sheep herder returned to Squaw Hollow in later years, he found no trace of the man or his mining operation. All that remained were the ruins of the cabin and a small pile of tailings nearby, silent testaments to the prospector's former presence. Interestingly, the sheep herder didn't search for the ledge himself. Perhaps he wasn't interested in gold, or maybe he respected the unwritten code of the frontier that a man's claim was his own. Whatever the reason, he simply remembered the rich ore he had seen at the cabin, and later shared the story with a friend who had an interest in mining. As we near the end of our tale, let's consider why this rich gold deposit has managed to elude discovery for so long. The answer lies in the very landscape of Squaw Hollow and its surroundings. This is a land thickly overgrown with manzanita brush. This hardy shrub, with its dense twisting branches, can form impenetrable thickets that obscure the ground from view. Unless a quartz outcropping is large enough to stand above this sea of green, it would be incredibly difficult to spot, even for the keenest-eyed prospector. This challenging terrain might explain why the gold ledge discovered by the Indian fighters and possibly rediscovered by the lone prospector has remained hidden all these years. It's entirely possible that countless treasure seekers have walked right past the site, the gold literally hidden beneath their feet. As we come to the present day, the lost Squaw Hollow gold ledge remains just that, lost. Its story has become one of the most enduring and tantalizing lost treasure tales of the Southwest. Unlike many such stories, this one comes with a degree of credibility, thanks to the testimony of respected figures like Judge Alsap and the eyewitness account of the Mexican sheep herder. The questions linger. Was the ledge found by the Indian fighters the same one worked by the lone prospector years later? Does the gold still lie hidden beneath the manzanita, waiting for a lucky prospector to stumble upon it? Or has it already been found, mined in secret by someone who chose to keep their fortune to themselves? As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to reflect on what the story of the lost Squaw Hollow gold mine represents. It's more than just a tale of hidden treasure. It's a glimpse into the hearts and minds of the pioneers who shaped the American Southwest. The lost mine of Squaw Hollow may or may not still exist, but its legend persists, a testament to the enduring mystery and romance of the Old West. It reminds us that even in our modern world, there are still secrets waiting to be uncovered, fortunes waiting to be made, and adventures waiting to be had. So the next time you find yourself in the rugged country north of Phoenix, take a moment to scan the manzanita-covered hills. Who knows? You might just spot a glint of quartz peeking through the brush, the first clue to solving one of the Southwest's most enduring mysteries. This has been the Southwest Desert. I'm your desert frontiersman, Alan, reminding you that the greatest treasures are often the stories themselves. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to write the next chapter in the saga of a lost treasure. Happy trails. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Southwest Desert. Today we're diving into a tale that combines the allure of hidden treasure, the mystique of Native American lore, and the relentless pursuit of fortune that defined the American frontier. Get ready for the story of the lost gold of the potholes. Imagine, if you will, a vast expanse of eastern Utah, where the rugged Rocky Mountains give way to sprawling plains. It's here, in this unforgiving landscape, that our story unfolds. A story of gold nuggets as plentiful as pebbles, of fortunes made and lost, and of a secret that has eluded treasure hunters for generations. Our tale begins with whispers and rumors, carried on the wind like tumbleweeds across the prairie. In the early days of westward expansion, when buffalo still roamed in great herds and trappers were the vanguard of civilization, stories began to circulate. Buffalo hunters, trappers, and scouts, the hardy souls who braved the untamed wilderness, all spoke of something extraordinary. Picture a campfire scene where grizzled frontiersmen swap tales over cups of bitter coffee. One man leans in, his voice low and conspiratorial, as he speaks of the Snake Native Americans of Utah. These Native Americans, he claims, have been seen trading gold nuggets for supplies, nuggets so large and plentiful that they filled buckskin pouches to bursting. But the Snake Indians guarded their secret jealously. Even to white men they considered friends, they refused to reveal the source of their golden wealth. It was said that the Native American women would disappear into the wilderness, only to return with these fabulous riches. But from where? That was the tantalizing question that set many a prospector's heart racing. As often happens with such tales, word spread. Letters from these frontier adventurers made their way back east, igniting the imaginations of those who dreamed of striking it rich in the Wild West. And it's here that we meet the protagonists of our story, two young men fresh out of Yale, their heads filled with visions of gold and glory. Frank Lane had just graduated from Yale Law School when one of these enticing letters fell into his hands. Instead of settling into a comfortable legal practice in some eastern city, Lane made a decision that would change his life forever. He decided to try his luck prospecting in the Snake Country before committing to a career in law. But Lane wasn't about to embark on this adventure alone. He partnered up with another college graduate, a man we'll call John Howard for the purposes of our story. Together, these two greenhorns set out for the West, their hearts full of hope and their minds brimming with dreams of the fortune that awaited them. Two fresh-faced Easterners, more accustomed to lecture halls than mountain trails, heading out into the vast unknown of the American West. They must have been quite a sight to the seasoned frontiersmen they encountered along the way. For months, Lane and Howard scoured the Colorado Rockies, learning the hard way that prospecting wasn't as simple as just showing up and striking it rich. They discovered a few low-grade gold quartz ledges, but nothing to write home about. As winter approached, they found themselves pushed out of the mountains and onto the plains of eastern Utah, the very territory where the Snake Indians were said to roam. But the plains proved no more forgiving than the mountains. Day after day, week after week, the two men searched in vain for that elusive motherlode. And as spring approached, Frank Lane's resolve began to waver. The dream that had seemed so attainable back in New Haven now felt as distant as the snow-capped peaks on the horizon. It was at this low point that Lane made a fateful decision. He would return east, back to the life he knew, leaving Howard to continue the search alone. And so, with a handshake and perhaps a heavy heart, Frank Lane turned his back on the frontier and headed home, never knowing how close he had come to unimaginable wealth. Now, dear listeners, you might think this is where our story ends, with one man giving up on his dreams and another left alone in the wilderness. But in fact, this is where the true adventure begins. John Howard, now the sole owner of their prospecting outfit, decides to take a break from his endless search. He mounts his trusty mule and heads out for a short hunting trip on the surrounding plains. Lady Luck, it seems, had been waiting for just this moment to smile upon our protagonist. As Howard returned from a successful antelope hunt, he stopped at one of the many potholes that dotted the landscape to water his mule and quench his own thirst. These potholes, depressions in the rock often filled with rainwater, were a common sight in the area. But this particular pothole held more than just water. As Howard bent down to drink, the noonday sun hit the water just right, illuminating the bottom of the shallow pool. And there, glinting in the sunlight, lay pieces of yellow ore. With trembling hands, Howard waded into the water and scooped up a handful of the shining nuggets. In that moment he knew. He had found it. The legendary gold of the Snake Native Americans was real, and he was holding it in his very hands. Imagine the rush of emotions Howard must have felt in that moment. Excitement, disbelief, maybe even a twinge of regret that his partner wasn't there to share in the discovery. But there was no time for such thoughts. Howard rushed back to camp, grabbed his gold pan, and returned to the pothole to work until the sun set. As darkness fell, Howard made his way back to camp with an estimated $700 worth of gold from just one afternoon's work in a single pothole. But this was just the beginning. For weeks, Howard lived off the land, hunting game and panning gold from the numerous potholes that dotted the iron-stained mesas around a great granite mountain. When winter's chill began to creep across the plains once more, Howard knew it was time to cash in his newfound wealth. He made his way to the nearest settlement, his saddlebags heavy with buckskin pouches full of gold nuggets. When the dust settled, Howard found himself the owner of a fortune worth nearly $100,000, an astronomical sum in those days. Now, you might think this is where our hero rides off into the sunset set for life. But the story of John Howard and the pothole gold takes another turn. Howard did indeed return east with his fortune, but like many who come into sudden wealth, he found that keeping money can be harder than finding it. Through a series of bad investments, Howard watched his hard-earned fortune slowly slip away, and so, many years later, with his pockets considerably lighter, he decided to return to the scene of his incredible discovery. But the West is a vast and changeable place, and Howard found that relocating his golden potholes was no easy task. Whether Howard simply couldn't find the right location, or whether the potholes had been worked out in his absence, the result was the same. Not a single nugget of gold rewarded his search. And so, the legend of the pothole gold grew. Old-time cowboys and sheep herders would speak of a place in eastern Utah they called the potholes, but none ever reported finding the kind of wealth Howard had stumbled upon years before. Some versions of the story suggest that the potholes Howard described weren't natural formations at all. Instead, they say, these were excavations made by Snake Native American women in a gravel conglomerate, the very source of the gold nuggets that had sparked the legend in the first place. If this version is to be believed, then somewhere out there in the wilds of eastern Utah, a fortune still waits to be discovered. A great bed of gravel conglomerate, studded with nuggets of gold, just waiting for some lucky prospector to stumble upon it. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our tale. The story of John Howard and the pothole gold joins the ranks of legendary lost treasures that have captivated the American imagination for generations. But perhaps the real treasure isn't the gold itself, but the stories it inspires. Tales of adventure and perseverance, of luck both good and bad, of fortunes won and lost. These are the true riches of the American West, the legends that continue to call to the adventurer in all of us, daring us to strike out into the unknown in search of our own golden dreams. This has been Southwest Desert. I'm your host, thanking you for joining us on this journey into the heart of frontier lore. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your gold pans ready. You never know when you might stumble upon a legend of your own. Happy trails. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Southwest Desert. Today we're diving into a fascinating tale from the silver-rich hills of Nevada. It's a story of boom towns, prospectors, and a long-lost mine that might still be waiting to be rediscovered. So sit back, relax, and let's journey back to the early 20th century when the Nevada desert was teeming with fortune seekers and dreamers. Our story begins in the early 1900s, a time when the American West was still wild and full of promise. The recent discoveries of silver in Tonopah and gold in Goldfield had set off a frenzy of mining activity that swept across Nevada like a dust storm. The hills of Nevada, once home only to coyotes and jackrabbits, now crawling with prospectors, mining men, promoters, and greenhorn adventurers hoping to strike it rich. The air was thick with excitement, and everyone had a pocket full of rock samples, each hoping theirs would be the one to make them a fortune. In this climate of fevered optimism, our tale takes us to a small, bustling camp a few miles northeast of a lonely flag stop on the Southern Pacific Railroad. The stop was called Humboldt, named after the nearby Humboldt Sink, a place well known to those who had braved the California Trail back in the gold rush days of '49. This new camp, barely more than a collection of tents and hastily constructed wooden buildings, had been christened with the optimistic name of Rosebud. It was a typical boom town, springing up almost overnight, complete with a post office, general store, and the usual assortment of saloons and other less reputable establishments. People were pouring in daily from surrounding states, all hoping to get their piece of the action. It was into this scene of bustling activity that our story's main characters arrived one fateful day. The stagecoach rolled into town, kicking up dust, and among its passengers were two young men who stood out immediately as newcomers to the rough-and-tumble world of frontier mining camps. These two brothers, whose names have been lost to history, walked into the general store with an air of purpose. They didn't ask questions or engage in small talk. Instead, they quietly purchased supplies, enough food to last them a couple of weeks in the desert. They packed their provisions into 2 rucksacks, along with blankets they had brought with them, and set off westward without a word to anyone. In a place like Rosebud, where fortunes could be made or lost on a whisper, it was considered unwise to pry into other people's business. So, the townspeople watched the brothers go with nothing more than curious glances, and soon forgot about them in the daily bustle of the camp. 2 weeks passed, and life in Rosebud continued its frenetic pace. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the 2 young men reappeared in town. They walked back into the general store, sunburned and weary, asking about the next stage out of town. It was then that a chance conversation revealed the incredible story they carried with them. As they waited for the next day's stage, one of the local miners struck up a casual conversation, asking if they'd had any luck in their prospecting. The older brother exchanged a look with his sibling, who nodded and reached into his pocket. What he pulled out was a chunk of ore about the size of an egg. He handed it to the miner, asking if he'd ever seen anything like it before. The miner examined the sample closely. He admitted that he had seen similar ore before, but not in this part of Nevada. In his expert opinion, it was a piece of extremely rich silver ore. This revelation piqued the interest of everyone within earshot, and soon the brothers found themselves at the center of attention. Encouraged by their audience, the young men began to tell their tale. It was a story that reached back to the early days of the California gold rush, nearly half a century earlier. Their grandparents, they explained, had been part of a large wagon train bound for San Francisco in 1849. When the train reached the Humboldt Sink, they decided to stop for a day to let their animals graze and rest. Their grandfather, an avid hunter, decided to use the opportunity to try and bring in some fresh meat for the camp. As he prepared for the hunt, he made a casual remark that would later prove fateful. He mentioned that he was down to his last 3 bullets and had no lead to mold more. With that, he set off to the east, rifle in hand, hoping to bag some game for the wagon train. Hours passed and the grandfather returned empty-handed. He hadn't managed to shoot any game, but he hadn't come back entirely empty-handed either. During his hunt, he had stumbled across an outcropping of what he believed to be lead ore. Thinking it might prove useful for making more bullets, he knocked off several pounds of the rock and brought it back to camp. The grandfather tossed the ore samples into a small bucket in the back of his wagon, where they remained, largely forgotten, for the rest of the journey to San Francisco. Once the family had settled in the city, the largest piece of ore found a new purpose as a doorstop in their home. Years passed, and the ore might have remained nothing more than an unusual doorstop if not for a chance visit from a mining expert. This visitor noticed the peculiar rock and asked about its origin. When told the story of its discovery, he suggested that the family have it assayed. The results of the assay, according to the brothers, were astonishing. The rock showed high values in both lead and silver. Suddenly, that old doorstop became a tantalizing clue to a potential fortune left behind in the Nevada desert. After their grandfather passed away, the brothers inherited his personal effects, including the journal he had kept during the journey west. In it, they found an entry describing his discovery of the ore, along with enough information about the location to justify a search. And that, the brothers explained, was why they had come to Rosebud. They were using their vacation time to try and locate the ledge their grandfather had stumbled upon so many years ago. They had spent 2 weeks combing the area described in the journal, but with little success until the very last day of their trip. At this point in their story, the younger brother produced another piece of ore. To the experienced eyes in the room, it was clear that this new sample was part of the same vein as the first. The brothers confirmed this observation and went on to describe their discovery. On what was to be their final day of searching, with their supplies nearly exhausted, they came upon the remains of an old camp. Scattered around were rusted picks and shovels, weathered dishes and cooking utensils, and various other detritus of a long-abandoned mining operation. In a small level area where a tent had clearly once stood, they found the second piece of ore. It was just lying there, as if waiting for someone to come along and recognize its value. The brothers were quick to point out that neither piece of ore could have been mere float, rock that had broken off from a larger deposit and been carried away by natural forces. This suggested that the source of the ore, the vein their grandfather had discovered, must be nearby. Despite this tantalizing find, the brothers couldn't stay to investigate further. Their jobs back in San Francisco demanded their return, and they had to leave on the next stage out of Rosebud. They took their precious ore samples with them, along with the hope of someday returning to continue their search. And there, listeners, our story takes an unexpected turn. For you see, those two young men, so close to possibly rediscovering their grandfather's lost mine, never returned to Rosebud. They boarded the stage the next morning and vanished into history, taking with them the secret location of their grandfather's discovery. But the story doesn't end there. The tale of the lost lead and silver mine began to circulate through Rosebud and beyond. It captured the imagination of prospectors and dreamers, becoming the stuff of legend. Even today, somewhere out in the vast Nevada desert, that rich vein of ore may still be waiting, unclaimed and unexploited. It's a reminder of the ephemeral nature of boom towns like Rosebud. These places flared into existence, burned bright for a brief moment, and then faded away, leaving behind only memories and stories like this one. The landscape of the American West is dotted with such places, ghost towns that stand as monuments to dreams both realized and broken. So the next time you find yourself driving through the Nevada desert, take a moment to look out at those rugged hills. Remember that they hold not just mineral wealth, but also countless stories of hope, perseverance, and the enduring human spirit of exploration. This has been Southwest Desert. I'm your desert frontiersman, Alan, thanking you for joining us on this journey into the past. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your dreams big. You never know what treasures you might discover. I hope you enjoyed these Southwest Desert legends. If you would like to support my time and channel, hit the super thanks heart icon on the bottom of the video and contribute. Happy trails!